Our first presentation from the Community Renewable Energy webinar on October 1st is by Marc Baxter. Due to a technical error, the presentation on this date could not be recorded, and the recording we've included is from a webinar last winter. Fortunately, we can still show you the same presentation we were lucky to have at the October 1st webinar. Please enjoy!
All right. Thanks to everyone for being here today with us and joining us during these sort of crazy times. We're working through our first totally virtual webinar for our team here, so hopefully it'll continue to run smoothly, but looks like things have been working well so far. So there we go. So basically we wanted to ensure that we covered the microgeneration side of things first, as it is a key piece of understanding community generation in Alberta, given that they are both on the distribution connected side of things, and there's often confusion between the two. So I think Steph gave a great overview of what microgeneration is and what it is not, and now we'll jump into talking more specifically about community generation and how it's different and what sort of the pros and cons of each are. So in order to understand community generation, we just want to cover briefly the recent regulation that is enabling this type of generation in Alberta, and that's the small scale generation regulation. So that was established in 2018 with the goal of reducing barriers for distribution connected electricity generation projects in Alberta. The regulation is not that long. It's fairly minimal, with the additional rules to be provided separately by the Alberta Utilities Commission, which I'll talk briefly about in a minute here. But anybody curious to really read through the regulation in whole can find it on the Queen's Printer online, and it's not overly complicated, but we'll give a brief overview now. So it outlines the requirements and definitions around setup and operation of a community generation project. So basically outlining all these terms that you're hearing today in legal language and what is and isn't going to be considered small scale or community generation. It outlines that the balancing pool will act as the default market participant for these types of projects. So basically what that means is there's the opportunity for anybody connecting as a community generator to have the balancing pool as the entity be the one managing basically the transactions with the electricity market in the event that's something they don't want to control on their own. So minimizing some of those barriers for how your revenue will be generated through your project. It basically provides Albertans the ability to generate revenue by selling the renewable electricity directly to the grid in a way that isn't possible through microgeneration. As Steph mentioned, microgen really is just for offsetting, and though you might see some credits on your electricity bill, it's really not intended to be a revenue generation model, and it's not specifically going to provide you those long-term benefits as much as it is just offsetting your own electricity and providing you some credits there. So as I mentioned, as the regulation is now in place, the Alberta Utilities Commission, the AUC, is the entity that's been tasked by the government with creating the actual operational rules and application forms for connecting these projects into the grid. And there's been a number of consultations around that so far, which we encourage you to look on their website and get involved in if you're interested. And a few of the documents have been released, with some more yet to come as these consultations wrap up. So with the previous graphic you had seen sort of outlining the difference between just generally distribution connected projects and microgeneration projects, this is just sort of showing the difference now between small scale and community generation projects, as they are slightly different. Though they are both enabled under the same regulation, the small scale projects, so small scale generation, basically is the simpler version, which is just a distribution connected project of renewable electricity generation that's connected directly to the distribution grid and provides revenue to the small scale generation owner. Community generation, on the other side, is a subset of this small scale generation, which provides tangible benefits to communities. So in both cases, they're directly connected to the distribution grid, not behind the meter like microgen, and they both sell all their electricity produced to the market. However, community generation is different in that there's tangible community benefits, either economic, environmental, or social, from the development of the project that are formally documented in a community benefit agreement or community benefit statement. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. So, as I mentioned, community generation, distribution connected renewable or alternative energy system that provides community benefits. The community benefits statement is a requirement for projects when the owner of the generating unit is not involved in any type of partnership. They're the sole owner. So in this case, that we're stating municipality, but just for clarity for anyone on the webinar that is not interested in the municipal piece of all this, community generation is available for a number of different types of entities in Alberta. That's listed. That includes municipalities, and they're in the regulation. So that would include societies, condos, cooperatives, educational institutions, First Nations, nonprofits, etc. We're using municipality in our examples here, obviously, for the sake that that's kind of our area of interest, but just keep that in mind. So in a situation where a municipality is the full owner of their generating unit, they would need a community benefits statement to qualify as a community generator, and basically just outlining in that legal document what the sort of larger benefits beyond just the revenue that they're generating are from the project. So that could be things like jobs created for their local residents, or GHGs reduced. All those types of things can be, in theory, community benefits. The actual requirements of approved community benefits are, again, something the AUC is going to be releasing, hopefully, details on more closely in the future here. Community benefits agreement, on the other side of things, is required when projects are not fully owned. So from a municipality's perspective, it would be a situation where they are either perhaps partnering with a developer on a project, they're not a full 100% owner of the generating unit, or they don't have a equity stake in the generating unit, but are interested in receiving benefits from the project. So perhaps they are not interested in having any ownership stake at all, but they do want to see benefits from a project being developed in their community. So in that case, they would enter into a community benefit agreement, or CBA, with the developer, sort of legally capturing what the benefits they hope to see from the project are. Again, whether that's some type of fund created for the community from the revenue, jobs, environmental benefits, etc. So on the ownership side of things, we did just want to quickly mention a couple points, which can have more detail found in some of the resources on our website, but just to kind of briefly go over them now. There are a few additional requirements for municipalities specifically if they're looking to be owners of generating units. So there is a piece of legislation called the Electric Utilities Act, specifically Section 95, which basically outlines that municipalities must receive an additional level of approval to become owners of electrical generating units to ensure that they are compliant with fair, efficient, and open competition, because they can have access to some tax benefits and things like that at times. So that is a piece that can be a bit of an additional barrier for municipalities looking to be full owners of community generation projects, but that doesn't mean that they aren't able to. And even if ownership is something they're not directly interested in, there's definitely lots of ways to continue to be involved from a partnership perspective. So why is community generation something that is of interest, and why not maybe just stick with microgeneration? I think, kind of as we've alluded to previously here, there's a really great opportunity here for sort of larger economic diversification and long-term revenue from community generation projects that isn't necessarily available through simple microgeneration projects. So again, with community generation specifically, all the benefits that you could see captured in one of those statements or agreements on the economic, social, or environmental side can be really motivating factors for communities to be involved in something like this that actually is a bit larger and generates some of those revenues to put towards those benefits. And it gives those communities a say in what those benefits actually are, rather than just a credit on an electricity bill somewhere that maybe nobody other than the owner of that system really has any control over where that goes. There is a great opportunity here to support Alberta's energy diversification. So as mentioned, these community generation projects are renewable or alternative electricity generation projects. So a great opportunity to diversify as some of the larger generators that Stephanie mentioned, the coal generators, et cetera, come offline. It's a great way to diversify our energy sources and also increase energy on the distribution grid to increase reliance. And then obviously there's some great opportunities along with that in job creation, economic development, and general community resilience for communities in Alberta, specifically. Obviously having that distribution connected generation can really increase the reliability of the electricity grid during any type of emergency. So briefly to cover the programs that the Action Center is involved in the community generation space. So as mentioned, we have the Alberta Municipal Solar Program for microgeneration. And on community generation, we've offered 2 programs over the last year and a little bit here. So first is the Community Generation Capacity Building Program, which Pembina Institute was a successful recipient of, and Vincent will talk a little bit about the work that they carried out through that program. So that is a program that we offered in partnership with Energy Efficiency Alberta, with the intention of basically providing funding to increase the capacity essentially of the community generation industry in Alberta to start to move these projects forward. So it provided funding for 3 types of projects: technical development activities, partnership development activities, and development of tools and training. So we ended up funding 12 projects from the Action Center side, which had a focus on municipalities. Those were a mix of all 3 types. So quite a few focused on type 1 and 2 of technical and partnership development to really sort of do the feasibility studies around some of these community generation projects and what they might look like if they were to be built. And then a number of projects also on type 3 of development tools and training, a few of which Vincent will cover. And then on the second program, it's the Municipal Community Generation Challenge. So this was a partnership program that we delivered with Alberta Innovates. And it was really designed to cover sort of that next step beyond capacity building. So for Alberta municipalities and their projects that had kind of covered some of that feasibility work already, and basically were looking for funding to bring their projects to fruition, this was an opportunity for them. So the municipalities and their project teams went through a multi-stage application process in hopes of receiving an investment for the development of their community generation project. And that challenge is now complete, and we are hoping to release news on the successful recipients in the coming weeks here, so stay tuned for that.
My name is Seth Leon. I'm with the Alberta Community and Cooperative Association. We're similar to, I'd say, a chamber of commerce for cooperatives and credit unions. And our mission is to see a strong co-op sector. And as you'll learn through this presentation, kind of the role of co-ops to solve problems when it comes to rural economic development. And we have some great co-op members that I'll mention along the way. So why cooperatives? That's a really good question. If anyone's been following the Mountain Equipment Co-op situation, that's probably coming up quite a bit. But in terms of generating renewable energy and generating community benefits, they're a great fit. If we look at in anywhere there's a high uptake of renewable energy, there tends to be a local ownership and a local benefit piece baked into it. As you know, what are some of the carrots that we can roll into these projects? Of course, in Alberta, we have cooperatives are part of the small scale generation as part of the community generation aspects that Marc gave us a great overview on that. As well, we have a number of co-ops that are getting into this space that are looking at projects, and I'll talk a little bit about them later. We also have some really great retailers that are cooperatively owned. So you can think of a consumer co-op, so a group of people who are buying electricity and that they own that business together. So we have Alberta Cooperative Energy and Foothills Energy Co-op. And those are 2 examples of they've been able to, one, provide affordable and purchasing of electricity and natural gas, as well as using the benefits from from those activities to reinvest into renewable energy projects. And then, of course, a large part of our co-op sector are rural electrification associations and gas co-ops. So they're providing the distribution of the utilities, and they are amazing stewards of crucial economic infrastructure across rural Alberta. So I think that when we think of like why co-ops for renewable energy, or for large scale infrastructure projects, or for putting infrastructure in rural Alberta, co-ops have a pretty good track record. So I want to keep that in mind, that this isn't a new idea. We're actually building off of something that goes back to the 1940s. Today I'm going to talk about some of the strategic features baked into the cooperative business structure and why I think it's a good fit for these types of projects. As well, we're going to speak to some of the community benefits, and then I want to, kind of 3 things that you could do to get started tomorrow, if this is a path that you want to look at. I won't go too far into the details of whether it's community or small scale generation or micro generation, but more we're looking at the broad strokes. I'm definitely going to focus on distributed generation. So being a generator, connecting to the grid, and generating revenue that way, as well as community benefits. If there's any questions, I'll try to watch the chat, but sometimes it does, it's hard to read the slides and do the questions, so I might leave them to the end. But if there's anything that's confusing, please raise a hand. Okay, jumping into it. Community generation is often, it's these types of pictures. So this, a group of people standing in front of solar panels on a flat piece of land. They're usually smiling, they're usually pretty thrilled. It's because these are large projects and they take a long time to do. This is an energy co-op in England. So it's less sunny than Alberta. I looked that up. And if they can do it there, I think that we can do it here. But essentially, this is kind of the finish that we want to get to. And really what's motivating them is that they want to have, access to renewable energy, control over the price of electricity in their community, more energy independence, and to retain those community benefits. That's really what's bringing them there, as well as a really exciting project in their community. Great photo op. I'm now going to talk a bit about the cooperative structure. And again, if you're following Mac, you're probably looking at a lot of these aspects. So I won't go too far into the details, but a cooperative is an enterprise that's owned and democratically controlled by the people who use it. And these are some of the features that I think add to the strategic advantage of why someone would choose a cooperative. And here we can see, it's an entity that's locally owned and controlled. The purpose of a cooperative is to meet a need, rather than, say, a corporation, which is solely to maximize profit for shareholders. Cooperatives have to be viable. They have to have a strong business plan and great, financial controls. But their performance of success is whether they meet a need. As a result, they can have dual purpose. They can have the financial goal, that return on investment, the quarterly profits, what have you, as well as the non-financial goals. So did they meet the need? Did they increase the value to their members? So the example I like to use is a creamery, a cooperatively owned creamery owned by dairy farmers. We can see, the dairy farmer might not get incredibly wealthy off of owning the processing business, but all the other benefits come back to them in terms of price stability, a common brand, being able to be part of a network of people that have a shared interest, and being able to share information. They might sponsor a local charity or a softball team, all these other assets that can be stacked on top of owning the asset together. Moving forward, the cooperatives in Alberta, they're a limited liability corporation incorporated under the Alberta Cooperatives Act, and that provides the legal structure for a group to raise capital, to share the risk and share the reward. And that is directed by a board of directors that is accountable back to the membership group. under these kind of elements. That's what they're accountable to, and that's what they're mandated to do. As a result of this, co-ops tend to be a great fit for long-term projects. We think of some of the co-ops in Alberta. UFA has been around for over 100 years, so about as long as this province. So they're built to last, and they tend to not be focused on, say, the quarterly profits, but rather, did they make an impact over 5 years? So that tends to impact the decision making of the people in the driver's seat, and to solve a long-term problem. So if we think of things like energy transition, economic diversification, it is a strong fit that's there. And then lastly, are they making the lives of their members better? And whether that's access to market for dairy farmers or access to renewable energy in your community. In terms of community generation, if we just map the structure onto or fit community generation through the cooperative lens, we can see that there's local energy needs and goals, right? There's the amount of electricity that's being consumed in your town, or say by a group of manufacturers, post-secondaries, your municipal buildings. There is a need for a local energy demand, and there might be longer term goals to say, we want to get off coal, or we want to have other sources, or we want to have lower prices. There are some things that are embedded into it. What's really exciting about the small scale generation regulation is the opportunity to put generation close to where people are consuming it. So we're looking at more distributed solutions. We're not looking to build giant coal-fired power plants and put it through a massive transmission system. Rather, we're looking at smaller, more dynamic patchwork of generators and putting generation where consumption is going to occur. And that opens up the door for lots of other solutions. And again, we're localizing it. The local energy needs of your town will look different from the community 500 kilometers away. The grid will look different. The energy resources that are there will look different. And so you need a solution that's more distributed and decentralized. So again, a co-op fits kind of strategically within that approach. Again, when we're looking at these projects, we need to see that they're viable, that it will provide a return on investment back to the investor, whether that's the municipality or the cooperative members. But also, we're looking at other goals. What are those community benefits? Is it jobs? Is it diversification? Is it the opportunity to get the benefits of investing in energy efficiency retrofits, right? There's lots of other elements that you can see, what are the non-financial benefits that could come from generating renewable energy, and putting that into the calculations. Again, the LLC that's able to then, be a robust structure to be able to carry out the goals of this group. Lastly, I think when we're thinking long term, that these projects are, have a very long lifetime, and we don't have a crystal ball, but we do know that our communities want to have reliable, safe, and affordable electricity. If you own the asset, if you own the solar farm or the wind farm or community hydro or cogen, what does that do in terms of controlling your utility costs? Electric vehicles, if you're a municipality looking at the cost benefit analysis of electric buses or on-demand services, being able to control the electricity or the cost of electricity, or have some impact there, can do a lot for your future planning of your community, right? As well as, will the grid change and be, will we see some innovation from the grid side? So will distributed solutions become a bigger factor? So we are looking at a bigger picture and looking further down the road. And then lastly, this piece of how do we retain and maximize the economic benefit within the community. And I think, having a structure that can consider all these factors is that we can take a wider scope in the project, the benefits that we want to see, and really ensuring that they come back to the community. Marc did a great job of talking about the jobs, the other community benefits, the GHG reduction, all these other aspects. So how do we have that in the goals of a local limited liability corporation owned and controlled by that community. And this is the measure of success. So anyway, that's kind of the strategically of like why a cooperative. I think that they're a great fit for these types of projects. Just speaking of some of these community benefits that have been mentioned in my presentation, as well as in Marc's. But first and foremost is the return on investment comes back to the cooperative that's in that community. So a lot of the energy transition, the investment in industrial scale projects tend to be by large corporations that are outside of the province or outside of the country. So any of the proceeds from those investments are leaving the local economy. So however that looks, you're not getting that local multiplier effect. I think the short-term benefits in terms of a local infrastructure project, that's construction jobs, it's project managers, it's a lot of engineers. We think of the application process, the assessments. These are pretty large projects that do direct capital directly into your municipality or municipal district, into your co-op. Distributed generation, I think, is a really interesting tool when we think of the grid. There's opportunities for behind the fence projects to be able to custom build it for your local energy need. And I think, this Renewable project has some features of that comes together. Energy efficiency incentives. So we can think of, for instance, if you're looking at the cost of generating a megawatt or abating a megawatt, once you're closer to the generation and have control over those elements, you can see the efficiency from those other pieces. And then, of course, the spin-offs. I think, electric vehicles, we're going to see a lot of uptake. And if your community doesn't have a charging station, how does that impact, other factors locally, as well as, tourism has definitely been impacted by COVID. But I think some of these niches around being a green community. I know a lot of people that were driving out to Raymond because they're a net zero town. It's kind of an interesting piece, and it connects, I'd say, again, this piece of local ownership and having these assets in your community will increase the impact into other areas. So to consider it. I just want to maybe pause here for a second. Is there any other benefits that people see when they're thinking of these projects? You can just add them in the chat box, as well as what out of these community benefits are a priority in your community. Yeah, Edward, that's really key. I think a lot of the early projects are that visibility, people saying, let's do a smaller project, but put it right in the middle of the town so everybody sees it and they get into it. The Foothills Energy Co-op, they took $12,000. That was their profit for the year, their surplus. And they used it to put on, I think, a 10 kilowatt system on the local cafe in Black Diamond at the Westwood Cafe. So it's a little tiny project, but everybody in town sees it every day. And when they go to get coffee, they have that connection to it. So the 10 kilowatts on a barn, in the back that nobody sees, I mean, it's great for that rooftop and that consumer, but in terms of getting, changing the attitudes and moving it from there, it's really important. Yes. Okay. Doug, one of the barriers that I see is that the local community's out of money. Yeah, that's something we can, I think, circle back to as well as Stephanie's point there about what are some of the challenges, because the economics are going to be a key piece. And I think just anecdotally, we talk about Alberta as kind of being the Texas of the North, or Texas is the Alberta of the South, but they've been really good. Their wind organization, or the wind association in Texas, has done a really good job of connecting those infrastructure projects to the local tax base and those local tax benefits. So municipalities are actually attracting wind companies to locate in their municipality. I know it's more complicated than I've explained, but I think being able to solve that problem in terms of the local economic benefit of having a resource that can be taxed, of the jobs. I know the Innisfail project speaks to a lot of these issues. And if you go to the Rural Roots YouTube page, they have a great video where one of the councillor that led that project can speak to those issues from the perspective of the municipality. So, and again, that has an MCCAC connection there, I believe, as well. So I'll just look at some of these other things. I know Colin saw he had, see the chat. Yeah, learning tool, a demonstration tool, community connections. Yeah, local jobs, local economic activity. You know, that's a key piece. And I think having a project, like going back to that picture of those folks in England standing in front of their project, there's a ton of community pride. And I think that that's something that definitely goes a long way. And to build those connections through something that's tangible, and changing the grid, changing the profile, and having your town to be a going concern is really important. Just a couple examples of co-ops outside of Alberta that are doing this work. And the reason I mention this is just to show the track record and some of the tools that are available. So solar bonds, they're based, unfortunately, in Ontario. But this is, you know, they've raised about $40 million and provided returns. This is through a bond. So they create a portfolio of projects that they lend to, their mortgage-backed assets. And a lot of this had to do with the fixed rate, the community feed-in tariff, or feed-in tariff that the province of Ontario had. So it's going to differ by area. But the key piece, I think, here is that there was a demand by the investors to want an option to invest in solar. And I think that that's something that we're seeing more and more. Products like CoPower and Wealthsimple, green bonds of all sorts, that there is a demand. And if you can respond to that, that might be help with your own financing and that community engagement. So there's probably some comments about Ontario and solar, but I won't go down that road. I'll look at the questions in a second. But I'm going to circle back to the bond process as well. In Saskatchewan, with their solar cooperative, similar structure of pooling capital within a co-op to finance local projects. And again, I mean, with SaskPower, they do have a customer, an offtake agreement with the government, as well as with the city of Saskatoon, that they've been able to benefit from. I think what's also interesting with this group is that they've also set up buying groups for residential customers to get a cheaper rate. And that's, you know, I think that they've been, if you check out their website, there's some language on that as well. It doesn't have to be, you know, projects that are connected to the grid, but you can build community and reduce the costs by coordinating the activities of a group of homeowners or business owners looking to reduce their costs. So there's a co-op strategy on the microgen side, and this group here has been successful in that. I think whether it's microgen or the larger scale distributed generation is you need those strong community leaders, a great business plan, and the offtake agreement. It works well in Ontario and Saskatchewan because they have different markets. But if you can build the business plan and for it to work in Alberta and retain those community benefits, I think that's where we can start to compare, say, apples to apples. But right now, it's pretty much apples to oranges. Here are a handful of co-ops, as I mentioned, that are based in Alberta. And part of the challenge that they've had is to find the offtake agreement. Originally, when the community generation elements were created within the small scale generation regulation, was to have a contract for difference with the balancing pool. So just some price guarantees over the long term. And that would have made a lot of these projects feasible. When we look at like the feasibility of these projects, part of the challenge is scale. The large scale industrial projects, they benefit from larger economies of scale, so the cost per watt is much lower, as well as they're built by larger firms that have a lot of the work they can do in-house in terms of the environmental assessments, the interconnection process. But when, you know, and as well, just those costs that go into the development and to get the project off the ground are really kind of absorbed within the overall operation. So for instance, if the application process and the assessments is going to cost $70,000 and your project is $100 million, you know, that's fairly easy to manage. But if your project is, you know, $1 million and your to get into the game, the first thing you have to do is write a check for or manage $70,000. It's a bigger barrier to entry. So there is a bit to do with scale. And I think that that's the nature of these projects. But having the offtake agreement and having a power purchase agreement with a customer is really the problem that we're still trying to figure out. I think as the cost of solar goes down, and as well as local partners are looking to buy renewable energy, there might be customers that are coming out of the woodwork. So if we look at Business Renewables Canada, they've been more on this larger industrial scale. But I think if you have a local project and there is, say, a large emitter or a firm that uses a lot of electricity, perhaps there's a strategic partnership to sell your local renewable energy to that customer. I know, again, it's more complicated than I've explained it, but I think through a distributed generation opens up some other options that could be explored. And if you have a strong team that can think creatively and engage those other partners, these projects could become feasible. But we're still building that market. But I think that there's a huge advantage in being a first mover. And who knows? But these are 4 co-ops that you should take notice of, and they do a lot of information sharing. So I know Bow Valley Green Energy Co-op, for instance, they have a great newsletter. And if you're looking to follow along with what they're doing and you want to replicate it, they're a great example. I know Spice has a project that's probably going to be announced hopefully in the next couple months, and they're doing some really innovative work. So we're getting close. I think for a lot of these projects, these are just kind of in the broad strokes, but like I said, hopefully we can get started. If you were looking to get started, these are some of the things that you could do. Jim Collins, who writes the Good to Great, which is a pretty popular book, is a big advocate for getting the right people on the bus. And for setting up one of these cooperatives, I think that that's the key piece, having people that understand the technology, the application process, the economics, but also can engage their community around this project to communicate the larger benefits, the intangibles, the local economic development pieces, the economic diversification, and what it's going to look like to their market is a key piece. This should be a team of people that can get things done, that trust each other, and might have a track record of working together. We need to keep in mind that these are multi-year projects. The development process is going to take a long time. When we think of it's about a year for the environmental assessments and wildlife and those elements. As well, if we're looking at a community owned, we might be asking people to invest locally. So we're looking to invest private capital, and that can be risky. So we need to have a lot of confidence in the group and that people trust them with the project. But I'm sure you know people like this, and you might be a person who would be a great leader on a project like this. The second one here is just kind of a broad challenge statement around trying to connect this idea of local ownership and community generation and to the other benefits. And I think this challenge statement, you can refine it, but I find it, even just doing some brainstorming of how does local ownership increase economic development outcomes. And so we can look at the local energy needs and consider what are some future scenarios that you would like, what we don't, 2020 has been filled with uncertainty. What will the energy needs look like in your community in the next 10 years? And how might owning an asset that generates electricity, improve those outcomes? What are some of the strategic partnerships that might come out of a project like this? Who are some of the folks that aren't in renewable energy or not, but are involved in the local economy that could see some connection together? And then, of course, understanding your community. Lastly is the location. The location of your site for your project will impact the costs, and that will impact its success. So being able to have an understanding of the interconnection. So looking at the grid, looking at what land is available, the solar atlas and the global solar atlas and global wind atlas those are free online resources you could look at to get a sense of, what's the potential. So the Smoky Lake project, which is quite far north, they knew before they even got started what the potential was that was there. Another thing you could do is, if you do have a project, is to get it down on a one pager, start that pre-feasibility, and start to engage your community. And I think Rural Roots and the MCCAC, that's a big part of their work, and they've done a great job around there. So that's it. Just one more slide. As I mentioned, the solar share, out of the back end that manages the solar share platform that raises the 40 million or millions of dollars is a group called Tapestry Community Capital. And we're working with them here in Western Canada. They've done a webinar recently. And if issuing a community bond is something that you're looking to use as a part of your project, that's a resource that we have and can connect you with. As well, we've helped to the co-ops that I mentioned, we have helped equip those champion teams to be able to incorporate their cooperatives and to be in a position to raise and deploy private capital to finance them.
Once again, the organization I run is called Rural Roots to Climate Solutions. We started off focused on agriculture. What we basically did one day, and we're based out of Stettler, Alberta, so East Central Alberta, so I guess not too far away from Lac-La-Biche. We were just looking at these different climate solutions that were out there for various purposes. And what we noticed was a lot of these climate solutions were actually farm solutions. I literally would say climate solutions are farm solutions. Farm solutions can be climate solutions. I wouldn't say they all are, but that's kind of been our strategy. So when it comes to discussing a challenging subject such as climate change, we tend just to focus on the benefits for communities, the benefits for the land, and the benefits for agriculture. What we use is something called a climate solutions co-benefits communication strategy, or at least that's what policy wonks call it. I just call it talking down to earth kind of language. But the cartoon you see right here, I think it does a really good example of demonstrating what I mean by co-benefit. So you got this climate summit. Obviously, the main benefit of implementing a climate solution is you can address climate change. But all these climate solutions have these lovely co-benefits. So preserving rainforests, sustainability, green jobs, livable cities. That's the stuff that gets us excited. That's the stuff that we want to see in agriculture. And that's the stuff we want to see in rural communities in Alberta. Now, for some reason, not two. So the hammer isn't meant to smash the solar barn right there. The idea is for us, really, climate solutions, they're simply just tools that we can use to build strong, thriving, resilient rural communities. If you think of something like a hammer does have different uses. It's not just for smashing nails. I like, in my youth, I opened beer with hammers at one point. It's the same thing with these climate solutions. Again, like I said, you can help address climate change. We can also do these great things for your community. So I think it's important to embrace the versatility of this. Now, just before COVID turned our lives upside down, we came up with this statement. So we had a meeting in Drayton Valley. This was March 5th of this year. Had a bunch of folks who are working in the same space that we are, so that community renewable energy space. Actually, Marc was there helping us out with this. And we were talking about what we call the Solar Lab. I know it says small town power, but our initiative that's focused on community renewable energy, it's actually called the Solar Lab. But we're trying to figure out what success looks like in that particular case. We've been doing the work for about a year, and basically we came up with this. So we want every rural community in Alberta to be producing community benefits for itself through generating renewable power at a competitive cost. Initially, when we came up with the statement, we actually flipped it the other way around. So we wanted to say that every rural community in Alberta is producing renewable power. But then we've put the community benefits up front because it was really, really important to make sure that came first because that really is our priority. Like I said, we're just using these tools that just happen to be called climate solutions to build those strong, thriving communities. So right now our solar lab is working with communities as far north as Peace River. In fact, I do apologize that Jen Ford couldn't be here today. Jen Ford is our solar lab coordinator in Peace River. Unfortunately, she had an accident. She's okay, but she wasn't able to do the presentation. And she's kind of our go-to person on the solar lab, so I'm jumping in for her right now. So we work with communities up there, and we work with communities as far south as Kainai First Nation. It's also known as the Blood Tribe First Nation. And we are working with one community not too far away from you folks. So we are working with Athabasca with a, I don't know if they've officially incorporated as a co-op quite yet, but they have hopes of becoming an energy co-op. So very similar to what Seth was talking about there. So we work with different groups, but like the work itself, it is a little bit different from our agricultural work. So if you are familiar with our agricultural work, it's very education based. So we have a podcast, we do webinars like this. When we still could do them, we used to do farm field days. But with the solar lab, what we're trying to do with community renewable energy, it's all about building capacity. So really what we're trying to do is take communities who are interested in community renewable energy and get them as close as we possibly can to an actual install. So another way you could describe it is really that we are trying to build out scaffolding for these communities to go from point A, we're interested in community renewable energy, we want this for our communities, to point B, to an actual install. So what I'm gonna do right now, I'm just gonna give you a bit of a, I guess you could call it like a landscape scan, just an idea of the different challenges that we're seeing out in the field. And we have not worked with every single community in Alberta. Like I said, we've only been doing this for about a year now, a little bit longer, I suppose. I'll give you an idea of some of the challenges these communities face and some of the ways they're able to come up with solutions. So this is our solar lab page right there. If you ever go to our website, so it's www.rr2cs.ca. And when we started engaging these communities over a year ago, we noticed there was a consistent theme that kept coming up, themes that communities needed help with. So one thing was, and this might be just because we do a lot of storytelling and communications at Rural Roots, but one request we got from communities quite often was, we need help communicating the benefits of the community renewable energy project that we're working on. And you know, that just might be because they like the way we communicate around climate solutions and agriculture, and they wanted to see us do it within the space of community renewable energy. The second bit of help they needed, or second area where they needed some help, was around engaging their community, which that one confused me at first, because at first I was like, wait a minute, you want our help to engage your neighbors who we've never actually met before. But the more I discussed it with other communities, the more I began to understand just like putting yourself out there on something like this. You know, the technology is, it's not actually that new, but the idea of a community producing electricity for itself in the form that we're talking about right now, that part's kind of new, especially for this particular province. So putting yourself out there can be challenging sometimes. So having an organization like ours that has your back or has a bit more experience communicating messages that sometimes can be difficult or challenging, then it made a bit more sense while they wanted a little bit of help around community engagement. And the third area, or the third ask, or the third need, it's obviously money. Like these things, I'm not gonna lie to you, they're not cheap. So financing these projects, it's always a challenge, and that was the other area where people were asking for help quite often. The one area we've never received a request for help is technology. All these communities, it blows my mind every time. They know so much about the technology by the time we get there. There's no need for us to bring in a technical expert. They know way more about solar or wind or geothermal, and most of the projects we work with are solar, than we do. So the technical expertise is really not a request we get that often. Just to reiterate that, it's more, I suppose it's more the human element that's where folks require a bit of help. So how do we help out with this kind of stuff? So we leverage the storytelling tools that we already have. Like I said, Rural Roots, we do webinars, we do podcasts, stuff like that. An example of where we're leveraging a storytelling tool that we have, we're really fortunate to be working with Trina Moyles, who's an author up in Peace Country. She's writing profiles on residential solar in Peace Country to talk about how the owners of those residential solar systems are benefiting from this, and not just on electricity, but other spin-off benefits that can come along. I don't know if it's the case in Lac La Biche, but I know in Peace Country, there are some folks up there that just think, no, solar doesn't work in the north. And I think Marc brought up in his presentation, like solar seems to be working pretty good in Germany right now. If it can work up there, I'm pretty sure it can work anywhere. I lived in Germany for 7 years, and there was not a lot of sun during that time. To help out with the community engagement side, we're working on community engagement strategies, but these community engagement strategies are specific to each community. So we're going to come up with one for Peace River, we're going to come up with one for Athabasca, and in the Blood Tribe, we're going to come up with a community engagement strategy right there. And the idea with these community engagement strategies, and we're also working on project plans that go along with these strategies. In fact, one of our consultants that we hired for this, Colin Smith, he's on this webinar right now, and he's working on that and doing a really great job. But the idea with these project plans and engagement strategies, we're trying to get as many people in the community involved, because when we get to the end of my presentation, when I talk about my 3 bits of advice, those partnerships are really key for these projects. The more people you can bring along in your community for these kind of projects, I'd argue makes them stronger. Now, the financing side, yeah, Rural Roots is a nonprofit. We do not have millions of dollars to give out. So we're not super great on that, but there's different options you can explore with financing. And one value we can bring to a project is Rural Roots does have decent connections within the sector to say, like, listen, okay, you need a financial planner, we'll go hunt them down for you. If you need to talk to an organization like Tapestry, hey, we work really closely with Seth and ACCA, he can introduce you to them. So we can help them explore the different options that are there. But no, unfortunately, we can't actually give anybody any money. Not yet. Now, I just want to go over some case studies really quickly. So this is Innisfail, Alberta, so right in central Alberta. This is a solar farm that went in a couple of years back. I think it's finally operational, but this is a really good example of community renewable energy. Really good example of partnerships are key too, because you had the town of Innisfail working on this one, you had an installer partnering up, and a local entrepreneur. They all just kind of teamed up together, put in the solar farm. So the solar farm, it generates about 20 grand annually for a community economic development fund for the town of Innisfail, produces enough electricity to power up about 4,000 homes, and the town also gets lease payments on top of it. So, and another thing I really like about the Innisfail story, I'm hoping I put that slide in there, just when you start down this path, all these new ideas start coming up. Once you enter that innovative space, there's all these cool things you can start doing. So, you know, they went with the solar farm, and then you can see that list right there. These are all the other ththings they began to do. Most of them are energy efficiency initiatives, but they decided to start adding it on to their town. And most of them, to be honest, most of them have to do with the local hockey rink to reduce the power cost for that. They even have a, I'm not supposed to call it a Zamboni, an ice resurfacer, I believe was the correct term, that runs fully on electricity. So like I said, once you get on this path of innovation of community renewable energy, there's all these like cool side projects that develop in the process that do generate benefits for the community. Now, one town that made headlines around this time last year was the town of Raymond. So Raymond could possibly be Canada's first net zero town. Once again, involving partnerships to make this happen. They developed a partnership with ANMAX to install about, I believe it was between 7 and 9 different arrays. Oh, by the way, so Marc's organization, MCCAC, as far as I know, was involved in both these projects right there. But again, a situation where partnerships were key. And on top of that, the spin-off benefits just kept coming and coming. So Greg Robinson, who's a development officer at the town of Raymond, he did a webinar for us. And I think, and I hope I'm not misquoting here, because they do have an area where they have these bifacial solar panels. So it's kind of like attracting the sun or energy on both sides, and maybe Marc or Seth can correct me if I'm wrong about that. But because they have these bifacial solar panels in the parking lot, it was actually saving money on snow removal costs. They said it was actually reducing the amount of snow they had to remove in those areas. So once again, another great spinoff, and it just completely raised the profile of the town. I haven't been out in Alberta that long. It's only been a few years. I'd never heard of Raymond, Alberta before. And now, like, if you're working in this space, you do hear a lot about them. And our friends up in Peace Country. So this is what Gen 4 is primarily working on. This idea, it's still in the works. They haven't actually installed the solar farm quite yet. But initially they had this great idea like, hey, the airport's got all this land and this could be a perfect spot for a solar panel. And if you put a solar array at a certain angle, it shouldn't affect the pilots as they're landing on the airport right there. Unfortunately, that idea didn't actually happen in the end. The reason why I brought it up in the first place, I'm not wasting your time or anything, the site is actually what brought the community together. So that those initial discussions that began with Jen Ford as well as Wanda Lauren, everybody got really excited about, hey, we can use this airport for something else. We can take a bit of land and give it multiple purposes. And those multiple purposes, or at least that idea of adding multiple purposes, hasn't really changed for them. So yeah, they've got a new site for their solar farm right now. It's actually close to the airport, but not at the airport. But it's really important for them because to involve agriculture in this. Their ideal solar array, they want to be able to incorporate livestock into it. But obviously it's going to involve changing a few things, but the idea is to take the site and make sure it generates multiple purposes. And also Wanda, she's really involved in school food and they'd like to incorporate parts there. So once again, once you hit that innovative space, there's all these, I don't know if you just wind up inspiring yourself in the process or just that creative thinking that got you there in the first place, could take you to a few other cool places. So as I kind of wrap up what I'm saying right here before we jump into the Q&A, my advice if you are going to step into the community renewable energy space is just like collaboration is key. I don't think a single one of these projects have been able to take off without collaboration. So definitely keep your eye on the prize on that. Another thing is, I think it's really important to know what your community needs and what your community wants. When Peace River was still talking about their airport solar project, they just got as many people as they could. They sat them down on a table and they just like laid it out there. Said, okay, what's your vision for our town? And through that, they were able to create that CVA that Marc was talking about in his presentation about community generation. So it's important to have that hard and that deep conversation, like, okay, what does my town want? What do we need right now? And can this project, because like I said before, the object or the goal with these community renewable energy projects, it's the community benefits. The electricity is like a secondary benefit, I suppose. So can the community benefits that this project could potentially produce, could those meet those wants and needs? So it's important to have that conversation with your community, and like I said, try and get as many different people as you can at the table. And the other thing is just avoid, and I think most people know this, just try to avoid reinventing the wheel where you can. It just saves you time. Once again, Peace River, it's a really good example that they decided, okay, we need some sort of formal organization to get behind our airport solar project. And they're about to create their own organization. They're about to create their own co-op, but then they realized just on the other side of the provincial boundary, there's a Peace Energy Cooperative right there who was willing to help them out. So they just kind of joined forces and they had access to their know-how, their resources, et cetera, et cetera. So where you can, like, it's okay to be creative and be, like I said, it's an innovative space. I suppose in some cases it's okay to just kind of go out there, but where you can avoid it, try not to reinvent the wheel because it will save you a lot of time in the end. And that's all I really have to say about that.